It starts with speed, and if you've been paying attention to what came out of Day 4 at the NFL Combine, you already know this draft class is sending a very clear message to teams like the Detroit Lions. This class is fast. Not just one or two guys fast, but historically fast at multiple positions. And that matters when you're talking about a franchise that has been building through the draft and emphasizing physical, explosive football on both sides of the ball. Let's begin with the headline grabber. Oregon tight end Kenyon Sadiq ran a 4.39-second 40-yard dash at 6'3" and 241 pounds. That's not just good for a tight end. He is now officially the fastest tight end to ever compete at the Combine. And this comes after a season where he caught 51 passes for 560 yards and 8 touchdowns. Production and speed, that combination is rare at that size. When you look at how the Lions have valued versatility and athleticism at skill positions, especially with the league trending toward mismatches in the middle of the field, performances like that get attention quickly. And it wasn't just Sadiq. Vanderbilt tight end Eli Stowers put together one of the most jaw-dropping athletic profiles we've seen in years. At 6'4" and 239 pounds, he posted a 45.5-inch vertical jump, which is a combine record. Add in a 51-second 40-yard dash and an 11'3" broad jump, and you're looking at a player who checks every measurable box. When you watch the gauntlet drill, which puts pressure on tight ends to catch multiple passes cleanly while maintaining speed in a straight line, this group as a whole impressed. In fact, the tight ends recorded the fastest average time of any offensive position group to test Friday. That's significant. Teams looking for contributing tight ends throughout the draft are going to have options. But here's where this really connects to Detroit. This isn't just about offensive skill players. The defensive side of this draft is loaded with speed, and that could be a major factor for teams looking to upgrade overall team speed. The defensive line averaged 4.87 in the 40-yard dash, linebackers averaged 4.55, defensive backs averaged 4.44. That is elite across the board. If you're trying to close gaps faster, chase down plays from the backside, or match up with today's high-powered offenses, this kind of class gives you the tools to do it. The safety group, in particular, made history. This was the fastest safety class ever at the Combine. Lorenzo Styles Jr. ran a 4.27. Robert Spears Jennings clocked a 4.32. Trayden Stukes posted a 4.33. Dylan Thanman ran a 4.35 for safeties under 4.4 seconds. The group averaged 4.55 overall. Speed alone doesn't make a great safety. Instincts are always the defining trait, but when you combine instincts with that level of speed, you're talking about potential difference makers in the back end of a defense. Thanman, in particular, may have changed his draft trajectory this week. Coming into the Combine, Ohio State's Caleb Downs and Toledo's Emmanuel McNeil-Warren were viewed as first-round locks. The question was whether a third safety could force his way into that conversation. Based on testing numbers alone, Thanman might have done exactly that. That's the kind of week that shifts draft boards inside front offices. There were also some interesting storylines beyond pure testing. Clemson tackle Blake Miller spoke about studying Penei Sewell and what makes him special. He pointed to Sewell's physicality, finishing ability, and nastiness, along with his athleticism to reach the second and third levels. That's respect coming from a young tackle who understands what elite play looks like. Sewell's reputation around the league continues to grow, not just for talent, but for the tone he sets with his style of play. Alabama tackle Caden Proctor also drew attention. At 6'7" and 366 pounds, he might be one of the best pound-for-pound athletes in the draft. He's even been used as a fullback. The conversation with teams this week has centered on maintaining his weight in the 350 to 355 range at the NFL level. That blend of size and athleticism is rare, but managing it properly will be key to unlocking his ceiling. And then there's Auburn center Connor Lew, whose journey to the position is one of the more unique stories of the week. He learned how to snap a football on the sand at the beach during his high school bye week, working with his younger brother at quarterback and his uncle simulating a defender in front of him. It's a reminder that development paths aren't always traditional, but they can still lead to this stage. When you step back and look at everything from Day 4, the theme is undeniable. This draft is defined by speed and athletic upside. Tight ends breaking records, safeties redefining benchmarks, defensive position groups averaging times that would have stood out individually in previous years. For a team like Detroit that has built its identity on toughness, but also continues to look for ways to get faster and more explosive, this class presents real opportunities. The big question now becomes this. If you're in the Lions front office and you see a historically fast safety class class and a tight end group with record-setting athleticism, which direction would you prioritize to make the biggest impact on this roster? When you really sit with that question, it forces you to think about roster construction the way the front office has to think about it. A historically fast safety class doesn't come around often. When you have multiple players under 4 seconds in the same group, and an overall average that sets a combine benchmark that tells you something about the depth. Lorenzo Styles Jr. at 4.27 is rare speed. Robert Spears-Jennings at 4.32. Traden Stukes at 4.33. Dylan Thieneman at 4.35. Those are numbers that change the geometry of a defense. Even if instincts remain the most important trait at the position, that level of speed expands what you can call schematically. You can disguise coverages longer, you can rotate late, you can recover when you're slightly out of position. And remember, Thieneman may have played himself directly into the first-round conversation. Coming into the week, Caleb Downs and Emmanuel McNeil-Warren were viewed as first-round locks. That was the baseline. The combine always creates movement, and when someone posts elite testing numbers in a deep class, evaluators are forced to revisit their grades. If Thieneman's film matches that athletic profile closely enough, teams picking late in the first round could start having very real discussions about him. That's how momentum builds in draft season. But here's the other side of it. The tight end group didn't just test well, they made a statement. Kenyon Sadiq running a 4.39 at 241 pounds is historic. That's wide receiver speed in a tight end frame. Eli Stowers putting up a 45.5-inch vertical at 239 pounds is absurd athleticism. An 11'3" broad jump on top of a 4.51 40 shows explosion and long speed together. And beyond the headline numbers, the gauntlet drill stood out. That drill tests more than hands, it tests body control, concentration, ability to maintain stride, and how efficiently a player moves through space. This group looked cleaner and faster than some receiver groups in past years. That says a lot. Now think about what that means from a roster building standpoint. When a position group has both top-end talent and depth, it gives you flexibility. You're not boxed into reaching early if you don't have to. You can let the board fall to you. You can prioritize value. You can address speed on defense early and still find an athletic tight end later, or vice versa, depending on how things shake out. And then there's the broader takeaway from day 4. Defense as a whole is faster in this class. Defensive linemen averaging 4.87, linebackers averaging 4.55, defensive backs averaging 4.44. That's not one position flashing. That's a full defensive pipeline loaded with athleticism. If your goal is to increase overall team speed, this draft gives you multiple entry points to do it. At the same time, you can't ignore the culture pieces. Clemson tackle Blake Miller, openly studying Penei Sewell and praising his physicality and nastiness, speaks volumes about Sewell's impact around the league. Young linemen aren't just watching his technique, they're studying his mindset. That's reputation. That's influence. It reinforces how the Lions have built their identity up front. Caden Proctor's situation also shows how nuanced evaluations can be. At 6'7" and 366 pounds, with the ability to line up at fullback, his athletic profile is undeniable. But teams are focused on sustainability, keeping him in the 350 to 355 range at the next level. It's not just about raw ability, it's about projection, development, and long-term durability. And stories like Connor Lew learning to snap on the sand remind you that development paths aren't always polished or conventional. Sometimes it's repetition, adaptability, and a willingness to embrace a position change that gets you here. So when you connect all of this, record-setting tight ends, the fastest safety class ever, deep defensive speed across multiple levels, rising draft stocks, and respected veterans being studied as role models, you see why this combine matters. It's not just testing. It's reshaping conversations inside war rooms. Now it shifts to do you lean into defensive speed because it's historically available? Do you capitalize on a rare tight end athletic class to create mismatches? Do you trust the depth and wait for value? These are the kinds of debates happening right now. So I'll leave you with this before we move on to the next development. If you had to bet on one move that would most elevate this roster, adding elite speed in the secondary or securing one of these dynamic tight ends, which one would you push for and why? And when you project this forward into draft weekend, this is where philosophy meets opportunity. Classes like this force teams to stay disciplined. When you have rare speed numbers across the defensive line, linebacker, and secondary groups, there's always the temptation to chase traits. But the smartest organizations understand that traits have to match identity. Speed without instincts doesn't fix coverage breakdowns. Explosion without technique doesn't hold up against NFL-level physicality. The combine gives you confirmation, not answers. Still, it's impossible to ignore what this safety group represents. When a class becomes the fastest in combine history at one position, it shifts positional value in real time. A player who might have been viewed as an early second-rounder can suddenly generate late first-round buzz because the league is collectively reminded of how much ground elite speed can erase. The difference between a 4.50 and a 4.30 at safety isn't just 0.2 of a second on paper. It's the difference between closing a window and giving up a completion. It's the difference between recovering on a double move and watching a receiver run free. At the same time, the tight end numbers demand equal attention. A 4.39 from Kenyon Sadiq at 241 pounds changes how defenses have to align. A 45.5-inch vertical from Eli Stowers makes him a red zone weapon the moment he steps on the field. When a tight end group records the fastest average time ever for that position, you're looking at a shift in how that role continues to evolve. This is no longer just about blocking and short area possession routes. This is about vertical threats who stress linebackers and safeties in space. The deeper layer here is roster economics. When a draft class is rich at one or two positions, it often allows teams to address needs without overpaying in free agency. Depth equals leverage. If you know there are multiple safeties capable of running sub 4.4 times and performing well in drills, you're less likely to panic early. If the tight end class is strong from top to middle rounds, patience becomes an asset rather than a risk. And that's where day 4 really leaves us. This wasn't just about eye-popping numbers. It was about confirmation that this defensive class, especially in the secondary, carries legitimate top-end athletic upside. It was about validating that the tight end group isn't top-heavy, it's deep, explosive, and productive. It was about prospects helping themselves in measurable ways that front offices cannot ignore. Every year, there are storylines that fade once pads go on. But historically fast positional groups don't just disappear. They influence draft boards, trade discussions, and long-term planning. The ripple effect of this combine performance will stretch into April and possibly reshape the first round more than people expected a week ago. This is where evaluation becomes conviction. Numbers meet film. Testing meets interviews. Traits meet scheme. And when a class delivers record-setting athleticism, it forces teams to decide whether they want to capitalize on it or pass and trust their board elsewhere. That's why this combine session mattered so much. It didn't just showcase talent, it clarified the type of athletes available, the depth at key positions, and the kind of speed that can change games on Sundays. And as this conversation keeps building, the most important thing to understand is that the combine didn't just confirm athleticism, it shifted leverage. When you have a safety class that becomes the fastest in combine history, that changes how front offices stack their boards. Suddenly, speed at the back end isn't scarce, it's available. And when something that valuable becomes available in volume, strategy changes. Think about it from a defensive coordinator's perspective. If you can draft a safety who runs in the 4.2 seconds or low 4.3 seconds and pair that with strong instincts, your coverage menu expands. You can call more aggressive blitzes knowing your back end can recover. You can disguise coverages longer because you trust the closing burst. You can rotate late without panicking about getting beat over the top. Those are not small schematic adjustments, those are identity level changes. Now, flip it to offense.